everyone, welcome back to our Aftermath series. I gotta admit, this is becoming one of my favorite parts of the week. Love talking to you guys. If you are finding this video and you don't know what I'm talking about, please click on the thing. It'll take you back to the beginning of the series. Basically, we're doing a weekly look at bits and pieces, fiddly bits, from Chuck Wendig's Aftermath. We are on the first book, and we will eventually be going to books 2 and 3. We're just basically parsing out important things we're learning about this new canon Star Wars universe, and it'd be great for you to join us. This week we are discussing. Actually, there's a minor mistake I made last week when I said what we'd be talking about, but this week we are talking about chapter 15 through chapter 17. When I told you guys about this, I made a comment about how we haven't had an interlude in a while. Turns out there's a little baby interlude mixed in there that I had missed. So hopefully you read that, even though I said it wasn't there. So we're going to do chapters 15, 16, 17, and an interlude this week. So let's get to it, because that's a lot of things to talk about. So chapter 15. Right off the bat, I took note to this that we're on a Carrack class light cruiser, which I thought was really cool, and instantly made me think of Zane Carrack from the Knights of the Old Republic comics, which were a tie-in to the very popular video game series. And so I went to Wikipedia, and I found out that there's absolutely no relation whatsoever, and that the Carrack class light cruiser apparently came from Zahn's original Thrawn trilogy, and apparently Zane Carrack is not named for him in any way, or at least if he is, it's not on Wikipedia. So that's an unfun fact. No relation between two things with the same name. We spent some time with the Empire as well, and the Empire. So they're in the middle of their council, and we're kind of getting a better idea of what everybody wants and why. So this guy named Crassus is talking, and he is the original target that Jazz the bounty hunter was after. So Jazz is sticking around on the planet because she wants all of these Imperial bounties. But Crassus was who she was looking for originally. He, as it turns out, was basically like a war accountant. So he's like, we should just formalize a Cold War, because we got like all kinds of money, because I know where all the banks are, and we should just do our own thing. And everyone's like, that's dumb. And then you have Shale, who was a strategist at the time, and then you have Dandelion. I can never remember his real name, but he's like Sloane's chief rival, and he's like, let's just go shoot all the things. And so there's this big confusing thing, and Sloane is like, what have I got myself into? Because she wants an empire that's born the right way, right? She doesn't want a seize of power. She wants a group of people that want an empire coming together with an understanding of what the empire is, to do what the empire is doing. And Sloane is watching that crumble around her and have it not work the way she wanted to work. So that's kind of her struggle, and that's where she is such an interesting character to me, because she is a person who just simply believes in centralized power. Not that she believes in the subjugation of species. She's not out there because she believes in slavery. She's not out there because she believes in anything other than order. And this is something the new canon has done really, really well, is shown that there are people that could politically like the idea of empires, but not like the idea of Palpatine, and just kind of separating the Empire from Palpatine. And it makes me think of, I read, speaking of original Zahn books, his legend book, Survivor's Quest, is great, firstly. But it deals a lot with Luke and Mara Jade. And if you're unfamiliar with Legends, Mara Jade is Luke Skywalker's wife in old canon, and she used to be an Imperial, and she was a dark side Force user, and came to the light side and fell in love with Luke Skywalker. And her whole bit is that she had the survivor's guilt. Why was she someone from the Empire that didn't die, and why is she still kicking, and why does she get to be a good person now? And that's a thing that's dealt a lot in the novel Survivor's Quest that I always found it. I always liked Mara Jade because I read those books at a very impressionable age, shall we say, for love stories. But this book is really where she like got cemented for me as such a favorite character just because of what she was going through. And I remember that she was telling Luke that and I think some of this pops up in the Thrawn duology too, but she likes the idea of empires. She just knows that Palpatine was evil. And I've just always found that intriguing, and to have that important part of her character just become a major theme in new canon has been really exciting for me. But anyway, that's way off point of what I was even going to bring up, because there's another really interesting thing in this chapter 15 that I really liked. Dandelion guy, Grand Moff Dandelion, was like, the rebels were the David to their Goliath story. He didn't use that analogy, but they were the David to Goliath in this story. And they managed to beat the Empire. So in theory, the Empire, which is now the underdog, can beat the rebellion back. And I believe it's Shale in the novel says that the Empire will never get to have that narrative, because the Empire is the group that, when they were in power, did subjugate populations, did use slavery, did all these terrible, terrible things. And because of it, they will never have the narrative of underdog or the narrative of liberator in the same way that the rebellion did, and that the rebellion and the New Republic gets to own that story that they kept using the word narrative for forever. And that had me thinking, it is such an important thing in the original trilogy that the rebels were the underdogs. I mean, that was a very, very intentional thing that George Lucas did. And it's kind of interesting because I never really thought about it, but it's such an important theme in the original trilogy, but we don't see it as much in the prequel trilogy. The prequel trilogy is very much about a group that's in power falling. Anakin, who had power, falling to the dark side. The Jedi, who had power, being complacent and being destroyed. The Republic being corrupt and being turned into the Empire. And if there was really an underdog in the prequels, it was the Separatists. And not only were they the bad guys, they also technically lost. I mean, really everyone who wasn't Palpatine lost in the prequel trilogy, but the Separatists really lost. That's kind of interesting to me. And then we get to the sequel trilogy, and I gotta wonder, who is the underdog? Because if you watch The Force Awakens, I get the distinct feeling like the First Order is the underdog. That it's a complete reversal of what we saw in the original trilogy. That this time the bad guys are the scrappy ones that are going to fight back and take their galaxy back. Which is kind of odd considering, The Force Awakens is a total clone of A New Hope, right? And I think the power shift comes from the one part of the movie, and I have a video on this, related to the Poe-Holdo debate from The Last Jedi, of what everyone forgets about from The Force Awakens is Hosnian Prime and the destruction of Hosnian Prime. Most of the New Republic fleet was around Hosnian with the Hosnian system when it blew up. It's really confusing, and this is one of the main weak points of The Force Awakens, is it doesn't really explain the difference between the New Republic and the Resistance, but they're not the same thing. So the New Republic didn't actually have a large army. They weren't doing anything to fight the First Order that was on the rise. So Leia helped form the Resistance. And a lot of that is in a novel called Bloodline, which is another book I'd like to do in a series like this. The First Order is kind of an underdog in terms of size, but not in terms of military power. And they're certainly not an underdog after they blow up the capital of the New Republic. And the Resistance, I think, is always the underest underdog. I feel like there's the New Republic, and then the underdog is the First Order, and then the underdog is the Resistance. But it kind of made me realize that this is a theme that's so important in Star Wars, and yet it's one of those themes that's important in Star Wars that is not consistent. And that was something I was really thinking about in this chapter. I don't know that I really have an answer to it. This is something I've been talking to Professor Django. I kind of want to get into on a streamcast sometime. We can take a lot of time with you guys if you like watching that live with us, and I can talk to Django about it, and we can really dissect this idea of underdog. So if that's a thing you'd like to see, that might be a future streamcast topic. But that was something that really, really hit me. Oh my gosh, and we're already at a lot of time. Okay, rapid fire. Other things we picked up. So there's also Tashu in this Imperial Council. Tashu is basically like a dark high priest. He served Palpatine as an advisor. He's a total dark side believer. And the way he talks about it is pretty interesting, because you find out most of the Empire didn't really believe that Palpatine or Vader were Sith. That it was just in the same way that an emperor would say, I am the God Emperor, blah blah blah, like it's just a thing Palpatine made up about himself, and they don't really believe it. And at the end of this chapter, we see Akbar with the Operator. The Operator is kind of like a Fulcrum-like character, if you're familiar with Fulcrum from Rebels. Basically somebody operating within the Empire that is feeding information to the New Republic to help bring them down. And so this is kind of like this mysterious thing that goes on throughout these books, is Akbar is constantly working with the Operator, and Akbar is not sure if he can trust the Operator or not. Interlude on Chandrila, which is the 6th interlude. This actually ties back to... what number was the other one? Because this is our second time on Chandrila. The second interlude was there, and it's the same characters. It's the reporter and the cameraman again, working with the senator. And this just gets kind of interesting because they're following the senator around. The senator gets hit in the face with a piece of rotten fruit by a protester. And rather than yelling and screaming at the protester, the senator talks to the protester. And they talk about their feelings and like what's going on and why the dude's protesting, and by the end of it, I guess the protester's also a senator. Basically, when it comes to politics, I've watched a lot of House of Cards, so when I read something like this, I get real cynical. I'm like, yeah, sure, that guy became a senator for a day, and then like no one cared about him 2 days later. But I do think it's interesting, and it kind of gets to the heart of a lot of what this book is talking about, which is there's all these problems in the galaxy, and there's a lot of people who resent the New Republic and resent the rebellion, because as bad as things were under the Empire, at least they had order. And so this particular person is talking about his planet and how the Empire was terrible, but basically the New Republic came in and kicked the Empire out and left. And what happened was pirates came in, and now pirates rule the planet, and the planet isn't any better off. And in fact, in some ways it's worse off, which is not at all applicable to national policies of the United States of America. Chapter 16! Nora wakes up at her aunt's house. That's right, so we're back at the aunt's house. Nora's trying to sleep and cannot. And she sneaks down to the kitchen to find that Jazz and Singer have already snuck down to the kitchen, and they are plotting plots. And they're trying to be sneaky about their plots, but she figures out pretty quickly that they've constructed a map, and they're trying to break into, like, the palace of Akiva, which is the planet they're on. Singer's not about her helping. Jazz immediately recognizes that Nora is somebody from the planet and an asset. Timon comes in. He's worried because his droid, Mr. Bones, they haven't found him yet. They all get talking, and basically this is the point where everything comes together. So Nora is worried about Wedge, who's still kidnapped, but she also wants to get Timon off the planet, and it's like their conflict is she wants to go help Wedge, but she feels like she has to help Timon, or Timon's gonna hate her forever because she chose the cause over him one more time. But Jazz and Singer are wanting to go after this Imperial Council because of a bounty. And then Nora figures out, well, that must be why Wedge got captured. Basically, all the paths cross, and the 4 of them join forces, and they decide that all 4 of them are going to attack the palace to free Wedge, to get the Imperials, blah blah blah. And a lot of this is, of course, because Timon wants money. Chapter 17. New Republic decides to send in a strike team. So Akbar is talking with Mon Mothma. So this is the first time we've seen Mon Mothma not in an interlude. They vote basically to send in a strike team to Akiva. So they're not going to send in a fleet because they don't know what's waiting for them. So they're going to send in a special forces team to the surface of Akiva to figure out what's going on, and that's going to have interesting complications. But now we are at the end of what we discussed. So I'm sorry, this is longer than usual because I had a lot of things to say. Okay, so let's try one more kind of hefty chunk, and if I find this is getting hard to fit all in one video, we'll slow it down after next week. But for this upcoming week, there's Chapter 18, then there's an interlude on Coronet City, which is on Corellia, Chapter 19, Chapter 20, Chapter 21, and an interlude. So that's going to be a lot, but it's actually only about 20 pages, so they're fitting a lot into about 20 pages. But I want to read all of that because that will put us nicely at part 3, and then we can pick up and we'll have just like the last leg of the book. And I might slow it back down because I think there's going to be a lot of stuff popping up at the end of the book. But let's do one more sprint of a large chunk of chapters. So that's basically chapter 18 to the end of part 2, beginning of part 3. It's probably the easiest way to remember that. And we'll talk about that next Tuesday. And If you are not already, please follow us on Twitter at Port Haven Forums. Visit port-haven.com for even more. And I will talk with you next week.